Tarzan Twins by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Chapter 7. The hot days and the cold nights dragged on. The food, poor and distasteful as it was, the boys learned to eat. They could not understand why it did not kill them, for they were sure that it contained all the germs that had ever been discovered, with several millions that had not. The hideous nights, made unbearable by cold and vermin, seemed eternities of suffering. Yet the boys lived on, lived and learned. They learned the language of Ukandu, learned to speak in a dialect that all could understand, learned to understand that of their captors, the Bagala. Many other things they came to understand during the days of their captivity, not the least of which was a new conception of the Negro. To Doc, whose experience with colored people had been limited to a few worthless specimens of the northern states, it came as a revelation. Even among the warriors of the cannibal Bagala, he encountered individuals who possessed great natural dignity, poise, and evident strength of character. Balala, a typical West Coast black, densely ignorant and superstitious, had nevertheless a heart of gold that revealed itself in his loyalty and generosity, while little Ukandu, the pygmy, perhaps among the lowest in the social scale of all African peoples, proved a staunch friend and a good comrade. To his natural shrewdness was added an almost uncanny knowledge of the jungle and the jungle's people, both beast and human. The tales he told the boys shortened many a weary hour. After the first week of their captivity, the boys had managed to get a message to Chief Gala through Balala and Zopinga, explaining to him that being unaccustomed to breathing the close air of a hut and living always without sunshine, they would surely die. They asked to be given more freedom and exercise, pointing out that there was little likelihood of their being able to escape, since they were unfamiliar with the jungle and would not know in what direction to go should they be able to leave the village. But upon one point they were very careful not to commit themselves. They did not promise not to try to escape. And as a result of their plea, Gala gave all the prisoners the freedom of the village during the daytime, placing the guards at the village gates instead of at the doorway of the hut in which they had been confined. And at night there were no guards at all, since the village gates were then closed and locked, and the dangers of the jungle were sufficient to keep anyone from attempting to escape. The boys had really had little hope that their request would be granted, and there is little likelihood that it would have been, but for the shrewdness of Ukandu, who had accurately gauged the impression Doc's wizardry had made upon Gala, measuring it, doubtless by the awe that it had created in his own superstitious mind. It was due to Ukandu, therefore, that Balala did not transmit the message in the form of a request. Instead, Zopinga had carried a demand to his chief, backed by a threat that the white boy witch doctor would loose some very much more terrible medicine upon him if he refused to permit them the freedom of the village. And Ukandu had been careful to ensure that the demand included both Balala and himself. Influenced by their fear of Doc's magic, the villagers treated the boys with more respect than they would have ordinarily been accorded, and there was one youth in particular who gave them a very wide berth, keeping as far from them as possible. This was Pabu, the youth within whose thick skull it was popularly believed reposed the big medicine of the white boy witch doctor. Since the moment that Doc had made the two knives disappear within Pabu's left ear, that unhappy individual had been the object of much suspicious observation upon the part of all the villagers. At first he had enjoyed this unusual celebrity and had strutted about with great pompousness, but when it had been whispered that Gala was becoming consumed with curiosity to learn if the big medicine was indeed inside Pabu's head, the youth had filled with a great terror that kept him almost continuously in the seclusion and dirt of his father's hut, for he knew of but one way in which Gala could definitely learn if the big medicine was actually within his skull, and Pabu knew Gala well enough to know that whenever the spirit chanced to move him, he would not hesitate to make a thorough investigation, no matter how painful or how fatal to Pabu. One day as the boys were lying in the shade beside their hut, Gala approached them. With him was an evil-faced individual whom the boys recognized as Ntamo, the witch doctor of the Bagala, a Mugala of great power whose influence over Gala made him in many ways virtually chief of the Bagala. His wrinkled face was seamed and lined by age and vicious thoughts, and clouded by a perpetual scowl, a fit setting for his bloodshot eyes and his sharp, filed cannibal teeth. As the two approached the boys, Intamo excitedly urged something upon the chief, but he ceased speaking as they came within earshot of Dick and Doc, as though fearful that they might overhear and understand. However, Gala-Gala, stopping in front of his two young captives, let the cat out of the bag. "Intamo say your medicine no good," he announced.
"Let him make better medicine,"
retorted Doc in halting and faulty Bagala. "Intamo say your medicine not in Pabu's head," continued Gala-Gala.
"I say it is. Didn't you see me put it in there?"
"We find out," announced the chief.
"How you find out?"
demanded Dick, and then, as a sudden thought popped into his head,
"Golly, you don't mean—"
"How you find out what's in a nut?" retorted Gala-Gala. "You crack it!"
"But you'd kill him!"
cried Doc, horror-stricken. "And if we do not find the big medicine there, we kill you," said Intamo, who would have liked nothing better than to get rid of the white boy whose big medicine had had a bad effect upon Intamo's reputation as a witch doctor, since he had been unable to duplicate Doc's exhibition of wizardry. "You come now," he continued. "We find out." And accompanied by Gala-Gala and the boys, Intamo led the way toward the center of the village where, in an open space before the chief's hut, all the ceremonies of the tribe were conducted. While Pabu was being searched out and dragged, resisting and screaming to be sacrificed upon the altar of ignorance and superstition, word ran rapidly through the village that a bit of delicious entertainment was about to be staged, and there resulted a rush for grandstand seats. A ring of savage warriors kept a circular place cleared. In the center of this clearing stood Gala-Gala and Intamo. To them, Pabu was dragged. Dick and Doc stood shoulder to shoulder in the front rank of spectators, their tanned faces blanched with horror. Two warriors held the half-fainting Pabu, while Intamo, armed with a knob carry, made mystical passes in the air and mumbled a weird incantation that was supposed to weaken the strength of the white boy's big medicine in the event that it should actually be found within the unfortunate Pabu's head.
"Golly," whispered Dick, "can't we do something to stop them before Intamo breaks that boy's head open with his club?" "Makes me feel like a murderer," groaned Doc. "You will be a murderer, almost, if they go through with this thing," said Dick. "But if you tell them the truth, they'll kill us." "When they don't find the knives inside his cocoa, they'll kill us anyway," replied Doc. "Then you better tell him," advised Dick. "There's no use letting him kill that poor kid." "I've got it," cried Doc. "For the love of Mike, quick, slip me your knife. Don't let anyone see it. Here, that's it. Now watch my smoke."
Slipping Dick's knife inside his loincloth beside his own, Doc stepped forward into the circle.
"Wait!"
he commanded, advancing toward Intamo, but addressing Gala-Gala.
"You need not kill Pabu. I can prove that the big medicine that belongs to my friend and the big medicine that belongs to me are both inside Pabu's head. I am a great witch doctor and do not have to crack Pabu's skull open to get the medicine out, the way Intamo does. See?"
And before Intamo could prevent, Doc stepped close to the unfortunate victim of Intamo's jealousy and Gala-Gala's curiosity, and with two swift movements of his right hand, appeared to withdraw the knives from Pabu's ear. Turning, he exhibited them upon the palm of his open hand to Gala-Gala and the assembled Bagala. Perhaps Doc's Bagala had been lame and halting, but there was no one there who did not perfectly understand the wondrous powers of his great magic, nor fail to see that his medicine was much stronger than that of Intamo. For it is very true that we are all convinced by what we think we see, quite as surely as by what we actually do see. Gala-Gala was nonplussed. Intamo was furious. Being an unscrupulous old fakir himself, he was convinced that Doc had done no more than play a clever trick upon them all, a trick by which he, for one, did not intend to be fooled. But now he knew that Doc had beaten him at his own game, and perhaps in the bottom of his ignorant, savage brain there was enough natural superstition to half convince him that perhaps, after all, here was a real, genuine witch doctor who commanded demons and controlled their supernatural powers. His fear and hatred of Doc were increased 100-fold by the happenings of the past few minutes, and within his evil heart there crystallized the determination to rid himself as quickly as possible of this dangerous competitor. Had he known what was coming, he would have used his knobkerrie to that end upon the instant, for Doc had been smitten by another of those brilliant ideas that had made him famous and feared at school as a practical joker, though it is only fair to record that his jokes had always been harmless and good-natured ones until he had met Intamo. He wheeled suddenly toward that portion of the ring where the greatest throng was gathered, and held the two knives out upon his open palm.
"Ladies and gentlemen," he cried, "we have here 2 ordinary pocket knives."
The fact that he spoke English and that none of his auditors understood him but added to the impressiveness of his words, since all the tribe was quite convinced that he was about to make big medicine.
"Step right up and examine them, feel them, bite them."
Some of his hearers began to show evidences of growing nervousness.
"You see that they are genuine. You will note that I have no accomplices. Now, ladies and gentlemen, watch me closely."
As upon the other occasions, he placed his left palm over the knives, clasped his hands, blew upon them, raised them above his head.
"Abracadabra!"
he screamed with such sudden shrillness that his audience fell back in terror.
"Allo presto! Change cars and be gone!"
He turned slowly about until he had located the exact position of Intamo, and then before the unsuspecting witch doctor could guess his purpose, Doc sprang quickly to his side and placed both palms over the old villain's ear.
"Now you see 'em, now you don't,"
he concluded, and turned with outspread empty palms toward Gala-Gala. He stood thus in impressive silence for several seconds, while the true meaning of what he had done sank into the muddy brains of his audience. Then he addressed Gala-Gala.
"You saw me take the big medicine from the head of Pabu and place it on the head of Intamo," he said in the language of the chief. "If you want to make sure that it is in Intamo's head, it may be that he will loan you his war club."
End of Chapter 7.